You're set to go,
All
Liz.
right, I'm all ready. Okay, great. Well, I'm Liz Higgins. I am a extension associate with the Eastern New York Commercial Hort team. Let me start my presentation. And yeah, so today we're going to talk about laying out your agritourism operation for a good customer experience, but also with a consideration of optimizing your returns too, because I'm assuming that one of your goals with this is to earn some money also. So I think the key thing is you're thinking about laying out your agritourism operation is that first impressions are really important. So the first impression often for people to get to an agritourism operation is going to be like through your website or social media, and this is a really good place for you to lay out, what you're offering, any rules that people may have to follow, like whether or not dogs are allowed, are there appropriate ages for the activity, what kind of an experience will people have, can they bring in food or is there a place for them to eat? Do they have to buy, if it's a pick your own, do they have to purchase containers or, things like that. And an advantage to laying that sort of thing out up front at the website is, it gives you an opportunity to, do some screening and manage expectations of people who are going to arrive. I think that way people are coming to people who've gone through your website. They have a sense of what they're going to experience. They have a sense of what rules they may need to follow. And so you've already kind of primed them for your expectation. And I do think it's important, I'm putting this how to make ice cream in a bag, to be realistic too. Don't overpromise. Don't, create, too high an expectation that you can't deliver. I made this mistake once. I did a great job advertising activities we were going to have at our one of our 4-H events. I had a whole sequence of activities. One of them was ice cream in a bag, and I think I made it sound like way more involved than it really was. And so this woman came with her granddaughter, and I guess she came specifically for all of my 4-H activities. And we made ice cream in a bag. And if you've ever made it, you dump milk, sugar, vanilla in a bag with like, then you put that bag in a bag with ice cubes and you shake it for like 5 minutes, and then that's ice cream, right? Like that's it. And we finished, and she's like, "That's it." And then she made me run through everything, and she was mad at the end, like really, really, really angry, because I think that she got the impression from our website that it was going to be a much more involved sort of activity than it was. So definitely use your media, your social media to manage expectations, get people excited, get them prepared for what's going to come. And then you want to be welcoming upon arrival, right? That's good signage. Last month, I talked about directional signage to your farm, but make them feel like when they get there, they've had signage to get there, then they know where to park, then there's signage that guides them to to where they check in, and it's very clear, like what they're supposed to do when they come, and they feel like whatever you're offering, whether it's a livestock experience or a school experience, that there are people there to greet them, that they know what to do, they know where to wait, they know where to go, and they're right when they come in, they are welcomed. If it's a winery, and there's seating, that there's somebody there to make eye contact and seat them, or there's instructions that they should seat themselves. Make it really clear what people are supposed to do so that they're not milling about feeling lost. And that's where directional signage, I think, that guides people is really important, so that they feel comfortable, they know exactly where they're supposed to go. And then maps and a guide through the site, so if you've got a more complex agritourism place, arrows that direct people, clear pathways if it's, there's multiple activities and they're going from place to place. If it's really confusing, like a "you are here" or some sort of, you know, um, signage, if it's a pick your own apple orchard, that the various apple, the rows are labeled so that, if people get mixed up too, or they're lost, they can tell, they can call their friend and say, I'm at row 35, meet me there or whatever. So things that like help people guide through, I think are very helpful. And then you want those nudges, right? Like, for safety or to reduce damage and improve environment. And when I say, nudges, I think, a lot of times you see signage for agritourism and it's really a lot of like, very legalistic, or very, it seems like, it's a grumpy lawyer. And, I don't know that, while you want to definitely make sure that people stay safe and that they don't climb on your tractors or get into your farm equipment, I think what you want to do is, first you want to reduce their opportunities for doing that through the environment. And I'll talk more about that in a little bit. But then, you want to sort of say like, hey, like you want to have more like, you see sometimes like more, sort of friendlier signage, like, that remind like my grandma says wash your hands or something, things that are funnier, things that are just like remind people to do things, but also creating it like, so if you want people to wash their hands after feeding the animals, have a hand washing station right there, right? Like make it easy for people to do, make it accessible, make it, like lower the bar to be safe, to reduce damage. um so I think, one of the key things is that you can do, I think, to be effective, and I really like this communicating with guests checklist. Don't leave communication up to chance, because a lot of what's really important with these agritourism, businesses is making sure that people, that you're prepared to communicate effectively, that, that you have, if a group is coming, have they been contacted ahead of time so they know, if they have any special needs, are all the forms or information sheets, have they been distributed to people, especially with school groups? Do people know what to bring? Do people know what kind of shoes to wear? Is there any other information for guests that they'll need? Really think through like all of the points of communication and have a checklist, and then review your farm periodically, or get feedback from people that you're doing that, because communication from the moment people find out about your agritourism venture to the end when they leave, and then even after even after the fact, we talk about laying your agritourism venture out, but part of laying it out is this communication plan, this communicating with guests. I think it's really important to have that. Um, Another thing I think, as far as laying your system out, that can really help sort of manage flow and manage the environment that people have, is really consider prepayment and reservations. During COVID, a lot of farms, just because we really did need to manage crowds and numbers of people, moved to reservation systems and prepayments. And there's been, some finding after the fact that they had a lot of other positive benefits to agritourism operations beyond sort of crowd control during COVID. One is it does, it does allow you to plan for volume. If you allow for prepayment and reservations, you have a sense of how many people are going to come. Is there a time of day that's likely to be more busy or less busy? Have what kind of activities have people signed up for, so that you can have staffing in place to be, not too many staff for fewer people, and not like too few staff to manage the crowd that you have. It definitely can save time at the entrance gate. People, especially if it's something like a pick your own or an activity, you can have, they've already prepaid for everything. So it's just a matter of like getting them through and giving it to them, rather than having them decide what they want to do and how many people and all of that. But this is another one that, I've heard from several growers as a side benefit, especially if you're offering something where there are a lot of different activities a person can purchase and the upfront costs are not insignificant, is that by prepaying, you have front loaded a lot of the cost before people ever even get there. And let's say they paid a week ago or a month ago or whenever. By the time they got there, they haven't suffered that immediate pain of paying. They've already paid and they've kind of forgotten about it. And so now they're more like if you've just laid like 10 minutes ago $200 to get your family of five into a pick your own orchard and a hayride, and then your kids start asking you for ice cream, you're feeling that immediate pain of that $100 entrance fee. But if you paid that like a month ago and you've just walked in and now your kids want ice cream at the thing, and it's an additional like $20, you're not, you might be more likely, and there's some anecdotal, sort of information to support this, you might be more likely to spend an additional amount because now that you're there, you're not feeling that pain of the upfront cost to get in. And so like, yeah, what's another $20 for ice cream or whatever? Or, let's get another bag of apples or whatever, because you're not, that big chunk is sort of behind you already. So that's another reason to consider that. And this is an example of the farm that, one of the farms that I work with, that's in our area. And so they give you the opportunity, they give you a slight discount if you pre-order. And, they have apple picking and then they have activities. And you can buy a lot of the activities as a package. They sell them as packages up front. They say that saves a ton of time at the gate. Plus, at that, going back to like people have already front loaded a lot of the high cost of being there, and so then they might be willing once they get there to add an additional activity or an additional experience or something. But they've already, they have all of the stuff they need to, to give them the package when they arrive. So they say it saves quite a bit of time. It helps them manage their staff. They know what people are coming to do. It just creates a much better, more efficient, but also more profitable, grower experience. Another thing that's very important is really thinking about optimizing your layout. You want to sort of map that journey through your agritourism venture. I have here a picture of Stu Leonard's. I don't know if many of you maybe have been in a Stu Leonard's if you're from the eastern part of the state or the tri-state area. I grew up in the town of the original one. And if you've ever been in a Stu Leonard's, it's not like a traditional grocery store where like all of the food is in aisles. If you've ever been to an IKEA, it's also very similar. Like you enter and it takes you on this maze where you wander around through the entire store. You never really know what's coming next. You go around corners and then all of a sudden you'll be confronted with, oh my God, it's a popcorn display. And then you go around a corner and it's like, oh, look, here's the Italian food display with like some fresh cannolis you can buy. And then you'll go around a corner and there'll be something else. And there's like little like interesting, and then they've got like animatronic puppets that like sing happy songs. And you end up having to go, unless you know the shortcuts because you shop there all the time, most people, you end up going through past every single thing in that store in order to get out of the store. But because they're always creating sort of surprises, it doesn't feel as bad as you would seem like it is because you don't know what's going to come next. And this guy is like set, like Guinness Book of World Record full food sales per square foot, because you might go in for like a gallon of milk, but by the time you've gone through, you've walked by cannolis, you've walked through somebody making popcorn, you've like tasted some food, you go past the puppets, and and it's like it's sort of like retail-tainment, sort of at its best. You can like take a lot of these lessons, in your own agritourism venture, like these ways Stu Leonard sells things, the way IKEA is the same way. You're constantly going through this maze. You go past every single thing, but they keep it interesting. They kind of keep it like enjoyable. You can, think about your layout, right? Like as people come in, they're going to go through the entrance. You're going to like have pathways that wander them, maybe make them go past the pick your own apples, but there should be some clear like path that takes them sort of past the ice cream and water, and an opportunity like one, like you don't necessarily want them to have to go, if they decide they want to get more apples, you don't want them to have to go all the way back to the entrance to buy another bag, right? Like give them an opportunity to make an impulse purchase of getting a few more bags because they're having fun. And oh, and by the way, here's some ice cream and water because you're at the very end here. You might be getting tired, and then you'll walk them by the hayride. You'll walk them past the pond with fish, and then have a fish food dispenser so they can buy some feed the fish. Maybe they'll wander by the animal petting zoo, and there'll be an animal food dispenser, and then around the play area, and then they'll have to go through the store in order to go through the exit, and then maybe an external picnic area. That way, some grow farms have said it can be really like having people bring their own coolers and everything in, like they have problems with theft, and they want to encourage people to buy stuff there. On the other hand, if you know that people have driven long distances and you want to be friendly, maybe having an external picnic area where they can sit outside and picnic, but they're not crowding or taking up space within your business to do that, depending on how you set it up, could be effective. But you're always trying to think about, like, maybe you want to give people like a play area near the store. That way, like, the kids can play while, like, mom or dad run in and buy something or get a snack. They can play a little bit and then they'll leave. But there's definitely like a flow in and a flow out, a separate entrance and a separate exit. This allows you to have some staff there to sort of eyeball people to make sure that they are not hiding fruit or whatever, but in a way that, like, makes it, you're reducing sort of you're managing flow, you're managing control, and yet you're giving people. One of the things that I think that Stu Leonard's does well, that in your if you go to some really effective haunted houses that they do well, is you don't have this like big open field where you can see everything going on from one spot. You want to almost like create like little rooms, where people can be in different places and have, sort of like surprises as they go through, because it makes it seem bigger. It makes it more interesting. It gives you something to look forward to as you're going through. I think, when you see places that are really effective, they really can utilize a relatively small space by almost creating a maze-like way of people going through it and having different experiences as they get to different places, but not having it all laid out at once. But maybe you give them a map to give them a sense of what might be coming next. Because why is it fun? One of the things that you're always trying to do with agritourism is really think about like managing sort of the flow of people through. Because, one of the reasons it's fun to go to an agritourism farm is that even though like people say they don't like lines, they don't like traffic, they don't like crowds, things are more fun when you've got other people there, right? Like, or even if they're around. So you always want to like create, a space that's small enough that if you don't have tons of people, it still feels like there's people there, but big enough that people aren't so crowded. So that's something that, it's sort of, there's some rules of thumb, but you're really thinking about like how to make it seem like, balancing that desire for like being around other people, having the energy created by other families with the families that are coming, but not so many people that people will get turned off by like having to wait in long lines, having to wait too long to do things. So how many people, busy enough so that it's fun and enjoyable, and that's really going to vary based on the activity and your target customer. You're balancing that like either intimate experience versus a fun experience, more like a festival. But you don't want it to be crowded or uncomfortable. People don't like to wait in lines. You want to like reduce transactions that make people have to wait. And that's why like having people buy tickets in advance so that you can move people through more quickly, having, not selling fruit by the pound, but having defined bags or stuff that people can put it in. You can move people through checkout a lot faster. In fact, they might not even really need to check out if you just eyeball them to make sure that they've only got your official bags. You want to really sort of reduce those sort of like pinch points, I think. But you also have to be aware of codes and zoning. There is, some formulas you can use, they call it like event capacity formulas. So some guides are, the formula is, your total event area in square feet. So if you have an area like the picking area, the apple picking orchard, or like a row in there, for example, or a area where people are gonna like get pumpkins, or an area where they're gonna like feed the fish, you figure out the square feet. Um, you know, the and then you divide that square foot by the recommended number of people. So six people, six, you divide by six is the minimum for sort of standing in a crowd, right? Like, so the people are, if you have a group of people, six is you want it, you want at least six. Divide your square feet by six in order to, like, if people are standing around, because if it's more than that, people will feel like too crowded. And if it's a lot, you divide it by 10 if people are seated, that would be like a minimum. You divide that square footage by 12 to 15 if it's like a more full service restaurant, or if you've got a winery and you're seating people for tastings. And then 18 to 20 if it's more like fine dining, you really have, or if it's, more of an intimate experience where you want people to not feel crowded and you want them to feel more like they're getting a more upscale experience. But just think, and the point of this is really to say, like, if you divide that square footage by a smaller number, you're going to have more people in that space. It's going to feel more like a festival. It's going to feel more crowded. And if you divide that square footage by a larger number, it's going to feel less people. And you want to balance that in order to like create the kind of environment that your customers sort of expect and want in there. But you don't want it to be so crowded that people like get turned off and then they don't want to come back or they feel unsafe. So other tips to manage capacity is this, I talked about this in the flow. You want to create like a direct, one directional foot traffic pattern through an area, whether it's a maze or whether it's a picking thing, so that people enter and then they go through and then they exit and then they're done. And that way, you can just sort of manage flow and you don't have people milling about and they know it, they're not getting on top of each other. One thing you can do is clearly label the rows or areas and assign customers there to manage the crowds. That way, like if one area gets too full, you can spread people out. But if you have a smaller group, you can send people just to a more defined area so that they have that experience of having other people around. You want to always direct customers to exit in a different location than they enter to maintain that flow of foot traffic. And then, as I said earlier, don't sell, if you're doing like pick your own or something, try to use standard containers, not selling by weight, to speed checkout. Also, the other advantage is, I think, that from a customer experience standpoint, if people pay for the bag up front as part of the entrance fee to get in, then they know, like, there's no unintended surprises. But I think what can happen sometimes with like pick your own, like apples or other fruit, they're heavy, and if you sell by weight at a volume amount that people, like, and all of a sudden they come out and they've got this big huge bag and they owe like, $80 for apples and they had no idea that it was going to cost that much. Now you've created an uncomfortable situation at the checkout and they leave with sort of like a bad feeling about the experience. So I think that sort of selling like a standard container up front as part of the entrance reduces that like that unintended expense at the end. And how you want people to leave happy, not, they've gotten over the cost already and now they've gone through and they've had a good time and they leave happy because they haven't like all of a sudden had an expense they didn't anticipate at the checkout. So final thoughts, and then I'll turn it really at this point then over to like questions and discussion, is, you definitely want to consider your layout to reduce injury or damage, signage, fencing, and siting of activities. And I think that, your goal really is when you're deciding where you're going to site your agritourism venture is, and this is like even sort of in risk management in general, it's a lot more effective and a lot sort of better is to reduce all of the opportunities for people to do things they shouldn't do. So rather than put up signs or barriers and saying, don't do this, consider if you can like maximize your layout so that you don't even need to do that. So don't put attractive don't leave like farm equipment where people can get into it. Direct people, create pathways that take them around or not in sight of, buildings or livestock or things that they really should stay away from. You don't want to you want to minimize, especially where you've got a lot of like kids and families. You don't want them to like be near electric fencing. Like just really think about that layout, your layout. You want to have sign. I mean, you definitely need to have signage that says don't touch the electric fence, don't pet the bull, like stay out of the thing. But ideally, that should be like the last resort, not your first resort for, for dealing with customers, especially, I mean, different types of activities, different groups, you're gonna have a different level of safety you need to consider. Um, you definitely want to consider your layout to maximize your returns, by reducing damage to crops. You don't necessarily want to have, I know a lot of people grow like club apples or really high value apples for wholesale markets. Ideally, you would not site those near your pick your own farm, right? Like people are probably gonna climb on the trees. They're not gonna pick apples efficiently. So if there are really high value wholesale fruit or whatever, you want to keep that to the extent possible separate from your pick your own area. And the same is true with vegetables, right? Like you definitely have to recognize that your pick your own area is not where you put your crops that you're going to sell in your retail or wholesale markets, ideally. And then you want to think about your layout to like move people through, efficiently. Like restaurants, you're trying to like, the more people you can get through efficiently, while still maintaining the experience people want. You don't want people sitting there hardly spending anything for 6 hours because it's your time, it's your employees' time. It's not necessarily cost effective. So you want to think about like how quickly can you move people through, because if you're only going to have a certain amount of people, maybe you only want to be open for 3 hours and really try to get them through at that time. You really need to think about, how you're going to use the time that you're open to maximize, to get a good return on your investment too. And then creating those additional spending opportunities. There's a reason why there's always a candy aisle next to the checkout. You want to have, little opportunities for people, not, to maybe buy a drink, or to buy another bag, for apples if they want to, or to get an ice cream cone, or to have, a single apple, to buy, if they don't want to necessarily buy pounds of apples, they're there to ride the hay maze. You might want to still sell some apples at the end, because they might want to buy a few apples to take out with them. Always run them through the store. There's a reason that, you never leave a museum without going through the gift shop. They should never leave your agritourism without going through your equivalent of a gift shop, if that's your type of business. And then consider your layout to move people through at the right pace and volume. I've already kind of touched on that. You want enough people there to make it fun, but not so many that it feels uncomfortable. I mean, we've all had that experience of walking into a restaurant and we're the only people there. And, most people don't say to themselves at that point, like, wow, this means we're going to like be able to get in and out really fast, right? They're like, wow, this place isn't so great. Like there's nobody here. So you definitely, like, it's important to have enough people. And so you might, you want to be able to maybe concentrate people if you have a smaller crowd, or spread people out if you have a bigger crowd. And then you want to consider your layout to reduce free riders. And we've, in a lot of the meetings we've had, this discussion comes up a lot, right? Like how to balance being welcoming with, folks who use your farm as a park or something. And so that can be either, a lot of pick your owns have moved to like having an admission fee. So it's like, there's a fee to pick, but there's also a pay to play. Like it's $5 to like even be in there. Maybe not allowing people to bring a lot of food in because, they might not buy very much. They might just eat their food and sit on your picnic tables and play on your things, but part of the reason you're having them come in is so that they eat your food, pick your apples, you have all that play equipment to encourage people to linger to buy more things, not to linger to eat their own food and stay there for the day. So that's just something to balance. Is how you do that, because you also don't want to, you also have to recognize that if people are paying a lot to come, and you want to encourage families, you might need to offer picnic tables or a shady area, just because knowing your customers, you're going to get more customers to come through if they also can eat their own food. So you just have to balance that by knowing sort of what your market is. So with that, I guess what I'll turn it over to at this point is opportunity for like questions and discussion.